They said they came to help her, but help doesn't usually arrive with locked doors, altered medicines, and smiles that feel like knives. They moved in quietly, almost politely. Meals were suddenly scheduled, doors double-checked, and her familiar vitamin bottles vanished, replaced by smooth teal tablets that dulled the world into shadows. Eleanor Whitmore, once a feared appellate judge known for dismantling liars with a single question, found herself shrinking inside her own estate. Her son called it memory decline, her daughter-in-law called it safety. Eleanor knew better. This wasn't care, it was theft, slow, methodical, and wrapped in love. The Whitmore house stood on a ridge outside Ashford, Massachusetts, a century-old stone manor built in the late 1930s when ambition still showed itself in architecture. The ceilings were high, the halls long, and the silence had weight. Since her husband, Charles, passed 4 years earlier, that silence had become a companion. Eleanor tolerated it. Silence didn't lie, silence didn't ask for money. She stood in the library, rain streaking down the tall windows. Her right hand trembled lightly against the curtain. The neurologist called it essential tremor, annoying, harmless. It made teacups risky and signatures sloppy, but her mind was intact, sharp, observant, dangerous. Headlights swept across the driveway. A dented gray sedan rolled to a stop beneath the portico, coughing like it might die any second. Eleanor exhaled slowly. They're here. When Daniel called days earlier, his voice cracked with desperation. Eviction, failed investments, bad timing. Her instinct was to write a check she always had. But then Marla took the phone, her tone syrupy and rehearsed. "Mom, we're worried about you being alone," she said. "Those stairs, that house is too big. Let us stay for a while. We'll cook, manage things, keep you safe." Family, the word had teeth. Eleanor was lonely enough to bite. The doorbell echoed through the hall. Daniel stood soaked, holding 2 scuffed suitcases. He looked older every time she saw him. Marla hovered behind him, pristine, holding a potted white lily. "Oh, Eleanor," Marla said brightly, stepping inside and shaking rain onto the marble floor. "This place feels so museum-like." "I like my museum," Eleanor replied, closing the door and turning the lock. The sound felt heavier than it should have. As Marla's eyes swept the foyer, Eleanor noticed something unsettling. That wasn't admiration, that was inventory, antiques, rugs, fixtures, values calculated behind polite smiles. "I'll organize your medications," Marla added casually. "Pharmacology was my minor." "I manage them myself," Eleanor said firmly. "For now," Marla murmured, soft enough to almost escape notice. As they climbed the staircase, Eleanor remained below, gripping the banister as her tremor surged. Through the narrow side window, she saw the neighbor's Rottweiler pacing the fence line, rain slicking its coat. The dog stopped, staring at the house, growling low. Even the animal understood something Eleanor was only beginning to accept. The danger wasn't outside anymore. Eleanor let them through her door, believing she was saving her family. But what if that single decision just turned her home into a cage she may not escape? The pills were small, harmless looking, but the moment Eleanor swallowed them, reality began slipping out of reach. Routine had always been Eleanor Whitmore's armor. For decades on the bench, order kept chaos at bay. Wake at 6 o'clock am, tea at 6:15, news at 7. Medication at 8, her medication. But now, barely 10 days after Daniel and Marla moved in, routine felt unstable, like walking on ice that could crack at any step. She sat at the wide kitchen island, the stone countertop cold against her forearms. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, dust drifting lazily in its glow. Her right hand tapped the linen napkin unconsciously. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of heels announced Marla. "Good morning, Elainer," Marla chirped, entering with a clipboard tucked under her arm, dressed far too sharply for someone with nowhere to go. "Did you sleep well?" "I think so," Elainer replied, though the night felt fragmented, waking, dreaming shadows that didn't quite make sense. Marla opened the cabinet and removed a ceramic dish. She placed it in front of Elainer with practiced precision. 5 pills, 2 white, 1 pale yellow, 2 elongated teal capsules. Elainer stared. "What are the blue ones?" she asked. Marla didn't turn around. "Your doctor adjusted the prescription. It helps with the tremor. You remember we discussed it earlier this week." "I don't remember agreeing to this," Elainer said, picking one up. The capsule was smooth, no markings, no numbers. Marla turned, offering a patient smile meant for children and the confused. "Elainer, that's exactly why I'm here. You did agree." Dr. Hansen explained everything. "Trust me, I know drug interactions." The word trust landed wrong. "I've been tired," Elainer admitted. "My thoughts feel heavy." "That's normal," Marla said gently, folding Elainer's fingers around the pills. "Look, your hand is steadier already." Elainer glanced down. The tremor had stopped, yes, but not because of control, because of weight, as if her arm belonged to someone else. Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Mom missed a dose last week before we got here." "That scared us." They spoke about her as if she wasn't present. Marla leaned closer. "Daniel worries you're fading. Don't prove him right." The words stung. Elainer swallowed the pills with lukewarm water. 20 minutes later, she sat in the library, newspaper spread before her. The words blurred, sentences unraveled. Her eyelids drooped. From the hallway, voices drifted in low, hurried. "Have you found it yet?" Daniel whispered. "Not yet," Marla snapped. "But with this dosage, she'll loosen up soon." Elainer tried to stand. Her legs buckled. Darkness folded over her like a blanket soaked in chemicals. As consciousness slipped away, one thought burned through the fog. "They aren't treating me, they're preparing me." If the pills are stealing her clarity and the whispers hide something far worse, how long before Elainer loses the one thing they can't afford her to keep, the truth? Elainer didn't wake up. She collided with consciousness, jolted by a smell that screamed danger. Her eyes flew open. Darkness pressed in from every corner. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m. But it wasn't the time that mattered. It was the odor, sharp, sulfurous, rotten eggs, gas. Adrenaline tore through the chemical haze left behind by the teal pills. Elainer swung her legs off the bed, nearly collapsing as the floor tilted beneath her. Her body was slow, heavy, but fear was faster. She pulled on her robe and stepped into the hallway. The smell intensified with every step. "Daniel," she called, her voice thin. "Marla," no answer. The house felt dead, not asleep, empty. Elainer gripped the banister and began descending the staircase, counting steps out of habit. 1, 2, 3. The smell grew thick, cloying, filling her lungs with panic. By the time she reached the kitchen, nausea rolled through her. Then she heard it. A faint, relentless hiss. She slapped the light switch. Fluorescent bulbs flickered on, revealing the nightmare. 2 burners on the gas range were fully open. No flame, just invisible death pouring into the room. 1 spark. That's all it would have taken. Elainer lunged forward, twisting the knobs off with shaking hands. Her pulse thundered. Tears stung her eyes. "Oh my God!" She spun around. Marla stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, hands covering her mouth. Daniel rushed in behind her, eyes wild. "Mom," Daniel shouted, "what did you do?" I smelled gas," Eleanor gasped. "It was on, I turned it off." Marla's expression shifted, shock melting into something sharper, accusatory. "You turned it off?" she asked softly. "Because I was down here at midnight, everything was fine." "That's not true," Eleanor said, dizzy. "I was asleep." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "We heard you walking around earlier. We thought you were just confused." "No," Eleanor said louder. "I always check the stove every night." Marla stepped closer, voice dripping with false sympathy. "Eleanor, you didn't tonight. I saw you wandering the hall. You were talking to Charles." The name hit like a blow. "Charles is dead," Eleanor whispered. "I know," Marla said gently. "That's what scared me." The room spun, doubt crept in, invasive and corrosive. The pills had made her dreams vivid, too vivid. Could she have come down here without knowing? "No," she said again, weaker now. "This is getting worse," Daniel muttered. "First the missing phone, now this." "Mom, you could have killed us." Marla wrapped an arm around him, forming a single, solid front. "We need to lock the kitchen at night for her safety." "Don't talk about me like I'm not here," Eleanor snapped. Marla's eyes hardened for half a second. "Then stop endangering us." Defeated, Eleanor turned and left the room. She didn't see Marla glance back at the stove. She didn't see the faint, satisfied smile. When doubt replaces memory and fear rewrites truth, how do you prove your innocence? Especially when the people accusing you are the ones setting the trap? Isolation doesn't arrive all at once. It tightens slowly until the walls feel like they've always been there. By morning, the house felt different. Smaller, heavier. Eleanor sat in the library, the only room that still felt remotely like hers, Alcott's essays untouched on her lap. Marla's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the lingering fog from the pills. "Check your accounts." The thought refused to fade. Eleanor reached for the antique desk phone, its brass receiver cool in her palm. She lifted it to her ear. Nothing. No dial tone, no static, just emptiness. She pressed the hook down and tried again. Still dead. "Daniel," she called out, irritation sharpening her voice. He appeared in the doorway, clutching a toolbox. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "The phone lines are out," he said quickly. "Storm damage the whole area." "A week to fix?" Eleanor asked. "That's absurd." "Utility companies backed up," he muttered. "Then I'll use my cell," she said. "Where is it?" Daniel shifted. "You misplaced it." Marla and I looked everywhere. "I didn't lose my phone," Eleanor said coldly. "Drive me to the bank. Car's in the shop." "My car, battery issue." She stared at him, her son. The boy she once carried on her shoulders through this very hallway. "You're lying," she said softly. Daniel flinched. "Mom, please, you're paranoid." The word clicked into place like a gavel strike. Gaslighting. She moved toward the front door, grasping the handle. Locked. She tried the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. The key hook beside the coat rack was empty. No phone, no car, no key. Eleanor leaned her forehead against the wood, breathing slowly. This wasn't protection, it was confinement. Behind her, Daniel's voice cracked. "You're not safe anymore, Mom, even with us here." She turned. "I'm not unsafe," she said. "I'm imprisoned." That night she lay awake, listening, footsteps, whispers. Drawers opening, they were searching. At dawn, she watched from her window as the neighbor across the fence, a retired cop in a wheelchair, argued with a man in a dark SUV. Daniel stood in the driveway, sweating, gesturing desperately. Debt. The fog thinned. Later, Eleanor stepped into the garden, arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth. The neighbor waved. "Eleanor," he called, "you okay?" She approached the fence, gripping it for balance. "I don't know," she admitted. "The new medicine?" "Medicine?" He frowned. "You never needed more than vitamins." The patio door slammed. Marla strode across the lawn, smile sharp as glass. "What are you doing out here without a coat?" She pulled a shawl tight around Eleanor's shoulders, too tight. "Please stop confusing her," Marla snapped at the neighbor. "She doesn't know who you are." Eleanor looked back once as she was guided inside. It wasn't confusion in her eyes, it was a plea. "They believe she's alone now, but what if someone outside the walls has already started paying attention?" The moment Eleanor realized the doors were locked, something ancient and dangerous woke up inside her. It didn't roar, it didn't panic. It calculated. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling not from fear but from withdrawal. The teal pills had been flushed hours earlier, disappearing down porcelain like silent accomplices. Her body protested immediately. Sweat dampened her collar, her heart raced, skipping beats like a faulty clock, but beneath the misery her thoughts sharpened. The fog was lifting. Downstairs, voices drifted through the vents, hushed, urgent, paper shuffling, drawers opening. They weren't worried about her safety anymore. They were hunting. Eleanor waited until the house fell into its enforced afternoon quiet. Marla insisted on rest hours as if Eleanor were a misbehaving child. At precisely 2 o'clock, Eleanor slipped on stockings and moved soundlessly into the hall, avoiding the seventh stair that creaked if stepped on too close to the edge. The library door was ajar. Inside, chaos reigned. Books lay scattered. Desk drawers yawned open. Daniel sat on the floor surrounded by documents, his face buried in his hands. "It has to be here," Marla hissed, standing on a chair to reach behind a portrait. She never trusted digital records. "What if there is no ledger?" Daniel whispered. "What if the bank handles everything?" Marla laughed, sharp and humorless. "The accounts are offshore, the only record is handwritten. Without it, the money doesn't exist." Eleanor's breath caught. "So we push harder," Marla continued. "Tonight, another scare. Confusion makes people talk." Eleanor backed away slowly, every word burning itself into her memory. They weren't waiting for her to fail, they were forcing it. Back in her room, Eleanor knelt in the closet and pushed aside old shoe boxes. Her fingers found a hollowed book hidden behind winter coats. Inside, wrapped in velvet, lay a silver fountain pen, Charles's gift, not just a pen but a recorder, disguised, forgotten, dangerous. The battery was missing. Eleanor's hands shook as she opened her nightstand and removed a tiny hearing aid cell. She slid it into the pen and pressed the clip. A red blink. Alive. That evening, she descended the stairs transformed, shoulders slumped, mouth slightly open, hand shaking dramatically. "I dreamed about the numbers," she murmured at dinner. Marla froze. "The blue book," Eleanor whispered. "Charles said it's cold." "Cold where?" Marla pressed, eyes gleaming. "The attic," Eleanor slurred. Daniel bolted upstairs. As Marla poured wine, Eleanor quietly tucked the pen into a potted fern beside the loveseat. When Daniel returned empty-handed, frustration boiled over. "Tomorrow," Marla snapped. "Once I have control, I'll tear this place apart." They sat down, glasses clinking, voices loosening. Eleanor climbed the stairs slowly, but she didn't go to bed. She sat in the dark, listening not with her ears but through the pen, recording every word that would bury them. Eleanor finally has the truth on record, but in a house where every move is watched, how does she get the evidence out alive? Midnight has a way of stripping away pretenses, and that's when Marla finally stopped pretending. The house was silent except for Daniel's muffled snoring drifting from the guest wing. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Alina stood near the staircase, heart steady, senses razor sharp. Fear had burned itself out, leaving something colder behind. Resolve, she moved toward the fern. The silver pen caught a sliver of moonlight glinting like a secret that refused to stay hidden. Alina reached for it. Looking for this? The voice came from behind her, smooth, amused, lethal. Alina froze. She turned slowly. Marla stood in the corner, wine glass in hand, eyes bright with suspicion and alcohol. "I was thirsty," Alina said weakly, slipping back into the role. "Don't insult me," Marla replied, setting the glass down. "I saw you hide something before dinner and I just watched you take it back." She stepped closer. "Hand it over." Alina backed toward the French doors. "It's nothing." Marla lunged, fingers clawing Alina's arm. Pain shot through her shoulder. "Daniel," Marla screamed, not for help but for an audience. "She's attacking me." The pen slipped from Alina's grasp, skidding across the floor. Marla saw it, her face twisted, not in fear but recognition. "You recorded us." Alina straightened, her voice clear and cold. "It's over." Marla laughed. "Who's going to hear it?" she whispered, kicking the pen under the sofa. Then chaos. Glass shattered. Marla tore at her own blouse, scratching her neck until blood appeared. Daniel burst in, confused and terrified. "She tried to kill me," Marla sobbed. "She's hallucinating." Daniel hesitated, then pulled out his phone. Sirens wailed in the distance. Alina's chest tightened. She glanced at the shattered doors. Outside, lightning revealed a dark shape pacing the fence. The dog. With a final surge of strength, Alina grabbed the pen from under the sofa and hurled it through the broken glass. "Fetch!" she screamed. The pen landed in the mud. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the dog vaulted the fence, snatching the silver object and vanishing into the storm. Police flooded the house moments later. Alina didn't resist as they cuffed her. She looked only toward the fence, whispering a prayer she hadn't said in years. Alina has gambled everything on a single throw in the dark, but will the truth reach the right hands before the lies lock her away forever? They took her freedom in handcuffs, but the truth was already on its way to court. There was no clock in the psychiatric holding room, no windows, just white walls, a bolted cot, and the low hum of fluorescent lights that never turned off. Alina sat upright, hands folded in her lap, wearing paper scrubs that smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. 72 hours, that was how long they could keep her. They offered her medication. She refused. They offered food. She ate only the bread. Time blurred without meaning. Doubt crept in during the quiet moments, cold, invasive thoughts. What if the pen failed? What if the dog dropped it? What if no one believed her? On the third morning, a nurse opened the door. "Your family is here." Alina almost laughed. They handed her a conservative navy dress, one she recognized instantly. The same one she wore to Charles's funeral, a message wrapped in fabric. The transport van ride was silent. Alina repeated her name under her breath, clinging to it like a lifeline. "I know who I am." The courtroom doors opened. "Objection!" The voice cut through the room like thunder. Alina looked up. A young attorney stood near the bench, breathless. Beside him, her neighbor in his wheelchair. At his side, the dog. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The attorney raised a sealed evidence bag. Inside lay the silver pen, mud-stained, tooth-marked, and alive. The recording played. Voices filled the room. Confessions, threats, lies collapsing under their own weight. Daniel's shoulders sagged. Marla screamed. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried quiet devastation. The petition for guardianship is denied. Arrest warrants are issued. The cuffs were removed from Eleanor's wrists. She stood slowly, dignity returning with every breath. Outside, rain washed the courthouse steps clean. The war was over, but the lesson was just beginning. With justice restored and lies exposed, one final truth remains. What was really inside the ledger they nearly killed her for? They destroyed a family for a fortune that never truly existed. And that was the final irony Eleanor Whitmore allowed herself to enjoy. 2 weeks later, the house felt different, not empty, peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the tall library windows as Eleanor sat at her desk, a thin blue ledger resting in front of her. Across from her sat Evan Clark, the young attorney who had burst into the courtroom just in time, someone she had once mentored when he was barely out of law school. "So this is it," Evan said carefully. "The account records?" Eleanor smiled and opened the ledger, blank pages. Evan frowned. "I don't understand." "The money exists," Eleanor said calmly, pouring tea despite the faint tremor in her hand. "Just not in the way Marla imagined." She explained how months earlier, long before Daniel asked to move in, she had placed every major asset into an irrevocable blind trust. No access codes, no leverage. No paper trail that could be stolen. The ledger was a story, Eleanor continued. A test. Greed fills in the details people want to see. Evan closed the book slowly. "And your son," Eleanor looked out the window. Beyond the fence, the retired neighbor tossed a frisbee while the dog leapt joyfully through the grass. "Daniel called," she said, "asked for bail money, and I finally said no." She slid a small velvet pouch across the desk. Inside was a single worn wheat penny dated 1938. "My husband's lucky coin," Eleanor said. "That's his inheritance. A reminder that consequences don't pass on their own anymore." The house would be sold. The proceeds donated to elder abuse prevention programs. The chapter was closing on her terms. As Eleanor stood, she felt lighter. Older, yes, but sharper than ever. Some think strength fades with age. They're wrong. If wisdom can outlast betrayal and truth can survive even silence, then maybe the real inheritance isn't money at all, but the courage to stand when the world tells you to sit down. Justice ended in the courtroom, but healing doesn't begin the moment the verdict is read. The days after the trial passed strangely quietly. No reporters, no neighbors knocking, no frantic phone calls. Eleanor Whitmore returned to her home under a court order that removed Daniel and Marla permanently from the property. The locks were changed. The alarm system reset. The house, for the first time in months, belonged to her again. Yet peace felt unfamiliar. She moved through the rooms slowly, relearning them. The kitchen where gas once hissed like a threat. The living room where lies were rehearsed over wine. The staircase where doubt had nearly consumed her. Every space carried an echo, and not all of them were gentle. Eleanor slept poorly the first few nights, not from fear but from memory. One afternoon, she stood in the master bedroom, opening drawers that had been searched and overturned. Inside the nightstand, beneath folded linens, she found something she hadn't realized was missing. A photograph of Daniel at age 7, grinning with 2 missing teeth, standing proudly beside a bicycle she had bought him after his first school award. Her hand trembled not from illness but grief. She sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself something she had denied for weeks. She cried, not for the betrayal alone, but for the son she thought she had raised stronger. kinder, braver. She mourned the man he never became. That evening, the neighbor visited, rolling up the drive just before sunset. His dog trotted beside him, tail wagging, unaware of the role he'd played in saving a life. "They're both being held without bail," he said gently. "You did the right thing," Alina nodded. "Doing the right thing doesn't always feel righteous." He smiled knowingly. "That's how you know it's real." Later that night, Alina sat at her desk and opened a fresh legal pad. The tremor was still there, but it no longer embarrassed her. She wrote slowly, deliberately. She wasn't documenting a case. She was writing a letter, not to Daniel, not to the court, to herself. A promise that she would never again confuse love with rescue or silence with peace. Outside, the house stood tall against the dark, no longer a cage, but a witness. Alina has reclaimed her freedom, but one final choice remains. How do you move forward when the people who hurt you share your blood? Freedom doesn't arrive with applause, it arrives quietly when you finally choose yourself. The morning Alina Whitmore left the house for the last time, the sky was clear and forgiving. Sunlight washed over the stone walls as if the estate itself were exhaling. The moving truck waited at the end of the drive, engine idling patiently. Inside, the room stood empty, no furniture, no echoes of manipulation, no shadows pretending to be love. Alina walked through each space once more, the library where her mind had nearly been stolen. The kitchen that had almost become her grave, the front door that had been locked against her will and later opened by truth. She placed her hand on the door frame, steady despite the faint tremor, not weakness. Just time leaving its signature. Outside, her neighbor waited beside his car. The dog sat proudly at his feet, tongue out, tail thumping against the gravel. Alina smiled and locked the door behind her, slipping the keys into her pocket, not to keep but to surrender. The house would be sold by the end of the week. Every dollar donated to organizations protecting the elderly from exactly what she had survived. No plaques, no public speeches, just quiet accountability. As the car pulled away, Alina looked ahead, not back. Somewhere down the coast, a smaller home waited. No grand halls, no hidden corners, just light, air, and peace earned the hard way. She would garden, she would read. She would wake without pills meant to erase her voice. Most importantly, she would live without apologizing for surviving. People often mistake age for fragility. They assume wisdom softens into confusion, that experience fades into dependence. Alina knew the truth. Age doesn't weaken you, it reveals you. The world had tried to write her final chapter for her, quietly, conveniently, and without consent. Instead, she rewrote it with clarity, patience, and courage. Not every victory is loud, not every hero is young, and not every inheritance is measured in money. Some are measured in dignity reclaimed. If this story reminded you that strength doesn't expire and that truth always finds its way out, then carry that lesson forward because someone out there needs it more than you think. Folded hands, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to comment your thoughts below. What would you have done in Alina's place? Until next time, stay aware, stay strong, and thank you for being here.